to say good evening to everyone and welcome to the latest edition of the Georgia Project Reading Group. And I'm your host, James Edward Mills, and I'm pleased to introduce to you this month's author, Majora Carter, author of Rebuilding Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Now, I look forward to an amazing discussion tonight, but before we dive into this evening's conversation, as always, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight I'm actually screening in from Dry Branch, Georgia, a few miles south of the city of Macon. That is the ancestral homeland of the Eastern Cherokee and Lower Muskogee Creek tribe. And I always believe that it's critically important, please, wherever you are in North and South America, take a moment to recognize the Native people who once called the place you now live home. I'd also like to thank the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for their support for this and other online discussions hosted by the Georgia Project, as well as the financial contributions of the Schleck Family Foundation, the National Geographic Society, and the National Park Service, who provide this project with funds so that we can pay our speakers a small stipend for our discussions, because I believe that friends don't let friends work for free. So now, those of you who might not be familiar with me or the Georgia Project, I'm a freelance journalist and an independent media producer with a specialty in outdoor recreation and environmental conservation. And I have a further specialty in studying issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the management of our public land. And also, I teach an undergraduate course at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, which is essentially a course called Outdoors for All. And many of the titles that we discuss in this reading and book discussion every month is on the reading list that we work with our students. And this is an opportunity for the general public to learn a little bit about the experiences of people of color and our relationship with the natural world. And also our shared lived experiences. And with that, I have the great honor to introduce my good friend, Majora Carter. And I'm just going to give you just an ounce of her bio. It's lengthy, but more than anything else, Majora is a real estate developer, but she's also an urban revitalization strategist. She's a MacArthur Genius Fellow. She is a Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. And she's also responsible for the creation of numerous economic development, technical inclusion, and green infrastructure projects, policies, and job training and placement systems. She's also a lecturer at Princeton University's Keller Center. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you my friend, Majora Carter. Majora, take it away.
I will do just that. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And so I am coming to you live from the land of the Sewanoi, up here in the South Bronx in New York City. And so thank you for having me. And again, James, always a pleasure to hang out with you, and on my birthday especially, so that's kind of fun. So I am doing this because I wrote this little book called Reclaiming Your Community. And what's interesting, there's many interesting things about the book, but one of the things that I did that a lot of authors don't do, which is I put my glossary right up front. And my glossary because I wanted people to be real crystal clear as I explained my work so they understood what I was talking about. A couple phrases that I use. One is low status communities. And so as I use that, as opposed to saying things like underprivileged or under-resourced or poverty-stricken. And I use that because status, frankly, implies that something much larger is at work. And I know it's a little uncomfortable, but good. We should be, uncomfortable with the fact that there are communities that exist, regardless of where you are. They could be inner cities, they could be Native American reservations, they could be even poor white communities, where the industry is come and gone and most of the people there are under the poverty line right now. And so with that, but those places are really the kind of places where inequality is simply assumed by people from both inside and outside of those communities. And you see it in terms of the health care industries and rather the health effects, the environmental burdens that those communities are often under. Poverty is a big thing, unemployment, bad policing, which often resorts into high levels of incarceration. All of that are there. And everybody knows where those places are. If you don't live in one of those neighborhoods, you know exactly where they are in the communities, in the cities or towns in which you live. And so this book is also, and I also use a phrase, the Majora Carter fan club, which I use to describe my haters, because, you know, if you do something that's considered a little bit different, they will come out, and that's just the way it goes. So anyway, but there's a whole bunch of other phrases, but those are the main two. So anyway, so our approach to community development is all about, it's a talent retention strategy, the same way that companies, you know, want the people that work with them to kind of lean in. You use a talent retention strategy. You know, you give people benefits, you make them feel good about where they're working. And, you know, unfortunately, in many low status communities, we have more of what is considered a talent repulsion strategy, you know, as evidenced by things like this. So this is the view that I saw every day for 4 years when I went from my house to the subway to go to one of the best high schools in the country, which is the Bronx High School of Science. And so this town, so this, my neighborhood, you know, this was a crack house. I mean, again, walked by it for almost 4 years, you know, during that time period. But it was a very different community from the one that my father moved into back in the early 1940s. You know, he was part of the Great Migration, you know, Black folks moving up from down south, that, you know, he was from Georgia, actually America's Georgia, married my mom, and this was them, I think she's pregnant with my older brother. And so, but again, the neighborhood that we moved into, the Hunts Point section of the South Bronx, it was a mostly white working class community, and it was a walk to work neighborhood because there was actually quite a bit, you know, of light manufacturing that people would walk to, you know, right from the same neighborhood. Other Black folks from down south and the Caribbean and Latinos as well were coming up, all looking for their great American dream at around the same time. White flight happened, and the highway construction boom was a real serious issue that happened here. Robert Moses in New York was the power broker, and he was a really interesting character. But this is the Cross Bronx, and literally destroyed whole communities as we went through it. Redlining, of course, my zip code was 10474. And that's when, you know, financial disinvestment made it so that banks weren't even loaning in places where there were the presence of Black people, literally. The environmental issues we started to experience around that same time. We had, so where there used to be a light industry, what literally later on became those places went to right to work states or overseas. And those same places created more, those places became filled with the kind of environmental burdens that you see on this slide. And this is around the time that I came in. I'm sure I know I was about 4 years old or so, and I'm on the phone with Santa Claus, you know, telling him I'm here with the Easter Bunny and hook me up because I've been a really good girl. But this is what I grew up with, you know, those formative years soon after that picture was taken. These are the years of financial disinvestment, landlords not being able, or any property owner being able to get, you know, mortgages or get secure financing to improve their buildings at all, were often committing to, you know, having their buildings torched and committing arson in order for their just to collect insurance money. So we saw this happening a lot, you know, in my neighborhood. And but what was really interesting, you know, is that even when the neighborhood looked like this, and a lot of it did, we lost 60% of the population during, you know, the era of the burning Bronx. What we often saw at that time, you know, was, you know, we knew that there were amazing people in our community. So it wasn't like there weren't talented people, you know, really smart ones academically, artistically, and all that stuff. I mean, hip hop was born during that time period, for the love of God. But what we saw, but it was always presented as though there was nothing in our community. So I would posit that we've never had a problem with talent, you know, being born and raised in low status communities, and definitely in particular mine. But we did have a problem with keeping it. And, but, you know, even that's true to this day, but we do have a lot of talented people that are in our neighborhood. You know, there's people that we can all look up to. We've got daycare providers that literally have run businesses for literally decades. We've got people who are, you know, we've got filmmakers and folks who work in film production. We've got entrepreneurs. We've got folks in the legal field. We've got doctors. We've got all sorts of fun folks. The lady on the left side of the screen is Noel Santos, who has launched the Lit Bar, which is the first bookstore in the Bronx in about 6 years or so. And she combined her two great loves, you know, lit as in literature and lit, like Tipsy into the lit bar, and it's wildly successful. It's like super cool. The guy in the top picture on the end is Marcus Samuelson. If you're a foodie, like, you know who he is. The young man in the bottom picture is what is his name? Christian Navarro is like, I know his family. They live right up the street from us. And, he's, if any of you have younger kids, he was in a Netflix show. His breakout role was in 13 Reasons Why. And now he's just a fabulous working actor, and really proud of him, of course. But all that to say is that, again, most of us were raised to believe that if you're athletically or academically, inclined, you need to move out of the neighborhood in order to live in a better one. And so creating this model, where it was just like, that was just understood that that's how it happened. And I was definitely one of them. By the time college came around, I was like, I'm out. And I'm never coming back except to go home to have my mom's really great fried chicken. And there was that. But I moved back to the neighborhood when I started graduate school, and I had this, I was at NYU and I couldn't afford a dorm or anything like that. So I had to move back in with mommy and daddy, which was a serious problem for me. And but fortunately, God's amazing, because it was around that same time, when I realized that, I moved right back in around the time when the city and state were planning on building this huge waste facility on our waterfront. And I was just like, wait a second, we already handle an enormous amount of the city's waste infrastructure and other types of environmentally burdensome infrastructure. And so you're telling me that we're going to get more, and all the wealthier and whiter communities in the city are not even going to have to deal with it. And yeah, that was basically true. That's what was happening. And at that point, I realized I could pretend I don't see this, and no one would have blamed me if that was the case, or I could actually move further, or I could do something about it. And I decided I wanted to be a part, of the solution and really face the problems head on. And so we did I was working with a group that worked on a citywide solid waste management plan that didn't disproportionately burden, poor communities of color. And so that was great. And we really worked on getting major policies passed, which was fantastic. But what I realized that part of the battle that we had was more about, how do you create more opportunities for us to not just fight against what we don't want, but are we actually fighting and creating the opportunities for us to get what we want in our own neighborhood? And that was where I realized that that's where I wanted to be. So I started focusing on project-based community development, and which was a really interesting thing. So for us, it was more about, how do you create some opportunities for things that we know people are leaving our community in order to experience? And that was, so looking at this, you're probably like, oh, great, this is another dump. And it was this one happened to be on the Bronx River. And this dump in and of itself was the kind of place that, people had been dumping on it for 30 some years, at that point. And what was fascinating was that I kept getting these notices from this woman who was just like, oh, well, we're doing some, at that point I was working with the Parks Department, who was getting funds from the U.S. Forest Service. And they were giving these little micro grants, $10,000, to communities that were working in urban areas that had threatened rivers. And the Bronx River, only true freshwater river in all of New York City, happened to be really one of them. So, she kept saying, because she just knew that at some point I'd figure it out, which I did eventually. And it was only because I had a dog that pulled me into what I thought was just another dump that was along, this place where I would run into another part of New York City to another part of the Bronx in order to find a park that was sort of usable. And so when she pulled me into this dump, I didn't realize that it actually dead ended at the Bronx River, because there were no access points to the river. Like, I knew that we had a Bronx River only because I saw it on on the subway map, but that's about it. But this thing dead ended at the Bronx River, and in the morning that I saw it, which was super beautiful, so we decided that to do this thing, and it was just a beautiful morning, like sunlight glinting off the river. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it, literally, even though I lived in the neighborhood all my life at that point. And so through that, that's I went and wrote the proposal to really start working on that site, and we got it. Most of the little bit of money was used. We bought lunches for people. We did art projects. We started to get, I had a super tiny salary, so actually that little bit paid for a bit of it too. But we got it to the point where you could actually do something with it. But what's fascinating is that even though people have said they leave the neighborhood to do things like go to nice parks, because we didn't have the culture of people doing that, people didn't know what to do with it, honestly. And so through that, we realized that we had just spent a little bit more of that money and started doing things like programming. So we did like boat building, environmental remediation, so that people could get a chance to see what's going on in the river. We did parties, we did film screenings, we had a blast. And this is one of my favorite photos in all the world, because as you can see, I'm just posing for my close-up, which I was, because this was the groundbreaking for a $3 million fund that was going to go and transform this park, or rather that dump. And this was our little beta version that we were able to work on. And this is what it looks like now. And James was there with me. He taught us fly fishing. It was very cool. And so what it's become, and it still is, this really amazing, piece on the river that the community is absolutely just glommed onto, because they should, because it's theirs. And through that, it's really just a beautiful place to be. And I got married there back in 2006, and that's my dog who pulled me into the dump. So literally jump-started my career. But we got married there, and it was a beautiful thing. And that is Zena with her well-deserved award, because I will absolutely share credit with her. But what's interesting, is that we've had a chance to help people, we would ask people as a developer, when I realized that's what I want to do, I really want to take this, community development strategy based on retaining the talent that's in our neighborhood and sort of use it to transform our neighborhood so that they're the places that we don't feel like we have to move out of them in order to live in a better one. And so through that, we decided that there was an opportunity here to start actually interview people about what their hopes and dreams and aspirations were. And so we did hundreds of surveys and focus groups, just asking people, what kind of neighborhood, is really meets their needs and aspirations. And so a bunch of the people that we asked were actually young graduating seniors, specifically because so many of them over the past 10 years or so had people who were we've had more kids graduating high school and going to college over the last 10 years than we've had in the preceding 30. So this was a really big deal, to actually have this in our community. We were really excited about it. But when we asked them, so what do you think the neighborhood needs now? And they would say things like, oh, well, we need more affordable housing for very poor people, or homeless shelters, because that's really, where many of them are going to end up anyway. We need more health clinics, as people have all these lifestyle related illnesses like diabetes and obesity. And we also need things like, community centers for the kids, stuff like that. And they were just like, great. And so I was like, well, wait, you guys are going to graduate and go to college. Are you going to move back to the neighborhood to experience these things? And they would physically recoil and be like, no, I'm going to have a good life. I'm going to get an education, and I'm going to get out of here. I don't want to be associated with things like that, get a good job, move my mom and daddy out of here, that kind of stuff. And so, but I think that spoke volumes, to what we were, experiencing, because quite frankly, the nonprofit industrial complex really does look at neighborhoods like these, where poverty is the cultural attribute. Or less policy wonky, parlance. It's kind of like that poverty is maintained, because it's assumed that that's basically what everybody's going to be. It's almost like it's our DNA, forget about our culture, but they act as though, because, and you see it in terms of the kind of developments that happen in our community, that's almost what's there. But when we ask people, do they think that was the case? And we didn't ask the policy wonky question about poverty as a cultural attribute, but we did ask them, really simply, what are you looking for in the community you desired? We did it a whole bunch of different ways, through the survey and focus groups. And so what we've discovered was that all the things that that are easy to find in a neighborhood, in an inner city, low status community, were the kind of, none of them wanted those things. When they talked about the community of their dreams, it didn't have any of the things that they saw here. But if they would talk about the things that they would go to, whether it was family restaurants and coffee shops, they dreamed of having the kind of housing, that grew as their income did. They wanted to be inspired by people around them. They also wanted to be inspired by people around them, or maybe be the inspiration. And it was a really kind of awesome thing. But again, if you listen to what the nonprofit industrial complex says, that's not what people want in their neighborhood. They need more programs, for that actually just essentially work to maintain poverty. And again, is it worth preserving? I mean, I think if you ask the nonprofit industrial complex, it's a lot of it, not to say that there aren't amazing things that a lot of nonprofits do, but overall, I do believe that it exists mostly to perpetuate itself and not necessarily to alleviate poverty. Because if you look at the billions of both corporate as well as philanthropic dollars that end up philanthropic, and even government dollars, things have just gotten worse. They don't get any better, but we keep doing the same things over and over again. And we see it in particular in terms of real estate development, because when in a low status community, you really only see two kinds of real estate development. You see, gentrification and displacement, which I think everybody knows about, but there's another kind that we call poverty level economic maintenance. So do you see a diverse array of food options, different dining options, some of them healthy, maybe some not, but restaurants, etc. Or do you see the same typical things, greasy spoons, fast food joints, not a whole lot of healthy places to shop? You'll see places to spend your money, but not necessarily the nice kind that makes you super psyched about, putting your money down on, and supporting something local. I'm a big fan of all sorts of, the cheap things, frankly. I love a bargain. However, I've noticed in low status communities, dollar stores proliferate. It's like the major retail option. Pharmacies it is a multi-billion-dollar economic engine for this country. A good portion of that balance sheet specifically comes from pharmaceutical industries, that are in low status communities. And the fact that, lifestyle related illnesses, diabetes and obesity, some heart conditions absolutely are related to this. Liquor stores, to be self-medicated, again, it's almost like part of the landscape. You'll often see those. If you want to invest your money or even just save it, you'll be hard pressed to find a bank or a credit union, but you will absolutely find things like check cashing stores and pawn shops, rent a center, payday loan places, things like that. Last but definitely not least, very highly subsidized, affordable housing, that developers know how to work the developer fees on, and they don't have to be great, frankly, or even good quality in order for them to make a very tidy living of it. But what's about all of these things, especially when they're combined, which they usually are, is what you'll find, is essentially is that it concentrates poverty in those areas, and it just perpetuates that cycle. And so, because I don't want anybody running around saying, "Oh, Majora Carter hates, poor people," that's not true. What I do hate, is the fact that the continued development of low status communities absolutely does exacerbate poverty and all the things associated with it, from low health outcomes, low educational attainment, higher rates of bad policing, higher rates of incarceration, and I think most even importantly, a lack of hope in the future of people in those communities. And so by creating those kind of those poverty level economic maintenance areas where this continues to happen, you develop, I think, a really crazy cycle that just continues and continues and continues. And that's why our approach about, talent retention is such an important thing, because again, there's no shortage of incredible people, coming from our communities. What we have is a shortage of them staying. And so that's why, and then what's really important is, because, what's interesting, another cool thing is that, I don't believe that gentrification happens when you start to see doggy daycares and, place, doggy daycares, and coffee shops and places where you didn't see them before. I think gentrification starts to happen when people in our own communities don't see the value in them. But just because we don't see the value in them doesn't mean that other people don't. So these are actual, the kind of solicitations that were sent to my house, slipped under my door. Now I get plenty of phone calls, asking me to sell my house, to them, usually for a fraction of what it costs, because statistically they know that most people in our communities see no real value. So yeah, they sell early and cheap. And, we've seen private equity, real estate funds, and other developers just make a killing off of low status communities around the country. As a matter of fact, just so that 20% of all homes in America are now owned by private equity real estate firms. And they're not like in wealthy areas. They're all in low status communities. They're the kind that literally regular people should be able to get a hold of their American dream of home ownership, but can't because private equity funds and their shareholders are looking at it and being like, that's mine. Y'all can rent. But that's another conversation about generational wealth that we'll have a little bit of it here. So, but anyway, we literally take out, when we would used to see these banners up in the neighborhood, we rip them down. They don't even put them up anymore. But when I put it out there for folks, somebody we knew in Baltimore literally followed up on an Instagram post that we did about it and just said that she has her kid, call up anybody who leaves one of these notices around and just says, get away from my inheritance, which I'm like, holla, that's how we should need to roll. But this is our talent retention strategy. It is all about creating the kind of beautiful space so that people feel as though they don't have to move out of their neighborhood to live in a better one. So it's a beautiful, high quality, both built and natural environment. There are socially viable third spaces around. Third space is like, a little urban planning term for a place that's neither work nor home, but allows you to build community. It promotes community because you're gathering in a place where, so you can do cool things together. It's got quality housing and a range of incomes with good paying jobs and opportunities for local business development, as well as having anchor, businesses to support lots of job creation. Nobody in this strategy conflates poverty as a cultural attribute. It is not a part of our culture. It is not a part of our DNA. It is a social construct as much as race is. So I'm like, we need to create opportunities for us to be a part of where we are, and we have to build that in. So remember that spot, the corner that I used to walk by on my way to the subway to take me to high school. Well, we took over that corner and we opened up the Boogie Down Grind Cafe, which is an urban, it's a hip hop theme coffee shop that literally celebrates our culture. Because of course, if you don't know, the South Bronx is the birthplace of hip hop. You're all welcome. And, we use this spot in order to create the kind of beautiful space that makes us feel like we don't have to leave in order to have a great time and be here and have fun doing it. And so we were able to create more spaces like this as a way to help us see, we need these places so that people can do, whether they're open mics or just, study, or start their own business, even run their own business out of the table at the coffee shop, create art openings, open mics, credit repair workshops. The space really is just a space, but it's used as the vessel that allows us to see what happens in our own community and make sure that it feeds us. And so, another thing that was super interesting to me was that, when people look at at coffee shops in neighborhoods like ours as if they're always harbingers of gentrification. And was always made me curious is that coffee in and of itself, comes from literally the blackest and brownest places on this planet. Yet the coffee as an industry, has just it's been given away to white men with skinny jeans. And I was just like, this is just so weird to me. But, honestly, I think there were definitely folks within the social justice movement who, and I think this is also the power of white supremacy that doesn't allow us to even see what we have as ours. And so I'm like, look, coffee shops, retail part is the most profitable part, of the entire industry. It's why shouldn't we have these nice things in our own neighborhood? And so, but not everybody agreed with me on that one. And so at one point, we were protested by, a social justice group near, but not that close, but anyway, nearby. And so if you can't read it, Majora Carter sells the Bronx out one coffee at a time. They made all sorts of like banners, like calling me everything except a child of God. But what was ironic about that is that um, the day that we were protested was the same day that we were hosting a workshop for two groups that were offering 0% and low interest loans to local homeowners so they can stay in their homes and do repairs if they need it, and also start businesses. So I'm like, okay, but that's the irony of it. But we've also, used this as an opportunity to help other folks in our community see the value of investing in local businesses. Like this is one of our very first investors, Sulma Arzu Brown, who is she's a Honduran immigrant. And her husband is Jamaican. And so together, they really have just been, an amazing group. This is a former rail station that we were able to acquire a few years ago, and it's created, and so now we're transforming it into something else. So when we acquired it from Amtrak, first thing we did, we hired some local kids from the neighborhood to actually, because it had been abandoned for a while, and so just to sort of enliven up the exterior, this was there. They designed this project and were able to make that happen there. And from there, we decided to even go a little bit further, and we're going to be transforming it into an event hall. So this is what it looked like back in the day in the early 1910s. This is after the initial demolition, and we're going through the historic tax credit process, and so we're going to be in full construction later. But in the meantime, we actually were able to use it as an event hall, and we still do. And so we have a pop-up shop. People will actually local vendors use it for pop-up shops. We definitely have also used it for things like Malik Yoba, who is a South Bronx born actor. Now he's a filmmaker and also a real estate developer, and he's also been working on doing a television series specifically about real estate development in New York. And I actually happened to be in the very first episode. So we did a premiere of it there, which was super fun. And we've also do all sorts of music. My event, the book party, which is also includes poetry and really fun stuff. Although I'm so sad. My DJ just ended up in the hospital, so I don't know what we're going to do for music, but that's a whole other story. We'll be able to get there. Tarana Burke actually did the launch of the paperback version of her book at our spot as well, which was super fun. And then, so we're transforming it into what we think is going to be just to maintain some of its historical stuff and just get really, really cool. So I'm so excited. But, by next year when you come visit us, it'll look like this. And it'll still be that wide open spot that's going to be awesome. And we're also doing it again as an opportunity for people in the local community to invest in us as well. A little bit of it. Oh, and this is the real reason why I'm in the South Bronx, because my dad was a Pullman porter, and his line was the New York, New Haven line, through which this station was once a part of. It had been closed by the time he was, had moved to New York, but wanted to buy a house on that line. And he was and the station actually was closed, but there was talk it was going to reopen. And he actually went to his he won like $15,000 in a horse race in California, carried the money back in a satchel to New York City, walked up and down, the street nearby, which is Monida Street, which is the house I grew up on, and was able to get this Italian family to sell that big old black man their home. Can you believe? I know we did, but amen. Thank you, Poppy. I love you. So that's what happened. So this is also another daddy story. My father, his last job before he retired was as a janitor at this place, which is a horrible place. It was the Spofford Juvenile Detention Facility. And, it was the stuff of that, rap artists would like talk about why their lives were so bad, as a result of this, because it broke children. And when it finally closed, and it sat there like 5 acres big, I'd approached the city and just said, that could be a really amazing site because it's big enough to do the kind of mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development that could just be a transformational real estate development for our community. That could have mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development, home ownership opportunities. We could focus on looking at what are the economic growth trends to make sure there's opportunities for people to not just work in some of those places, but also be the people who are building those businesses, because you have enough space to do so. And then having things like public space, which is a great democratizer when it's done well, commercial and retail, so that dollars could circulate within the community and stay in the community, and things like that, which would be super awesome. And also the thing that I loved the most about it, because I really felt like in my bones that knowing just how many post-industrial American cities literally had the same type of topography that our neighborhood did, where there was a residential part on one side and the industrial area literally like right smack up against it, and this little weird hinge area where they would meet in the middle. But what you knew, if you know anything about these areas in post-industrial cities, that you'll see that where those places meet, it's this like a no man's land of zoning and nothing. It's just weird. And so nothing really happens, but usually bad stuff does. Like in this case, we had the jail, which is residential on one side and industry on the other side. And because it was kind of like a lonely sort of bleak place, everybody in the neighborhood knew this is where truckers go to pick up a prostitute. But that would change, once you change the ground plane and literally created more opportunities, for, whether it was, 3 shifts, for light manufacturing, entrances to apartments and co-ops and schools and theaters and things like that, all on this one big street. Suddenly good uses will drive out bad uses, and it could be super hot. Our goal was to literally create more opportunities that would raise the bar for what passed for real estate development within our communities. Because it's not like one cute little project's like, oh, it's so hot. No. We need to radically change what we're doing. We need to not concentrate poverty. Because we need to retain the talent that's in our community so that they can feel like they can actually invest in their own communities, maybe keep their mommy and daddy's property instead of selling it to a predatory speculator, stuff like that. Really think about opening up a business here and staying here and literally building a family and creating more generational wealth that stays, within our communities. So we were super excited because we assembled look, I'm gonna claim it. I'm sure we were literally the most diverse, team with all equity partners that had more women and, people of color owned firms that to compete as a part of this process. And since I am, I value diversity, out of the 6 teams, 2 of them were white males. So I'm just saying, we value it. We put our money where our mouth was. So, but anyways, we put together this amazing proposal with more than 1,200 units of mixed income housing, including 100 units of low income home ownership by Habitat for Humanity's New York City. And we had, 200,000 square feet that was going to be reserved specifically for the kind of job creating enterprises in manufacturing and commercial and cultural uses that would have brought 800 permanent jobs to this community. And, and just beautifully designed public space. And just, we were so excited. But nope, the city, in all its infinite wisdom, decided instead that they would transform that space into what was a essentially another low-income housing project with a big health clinic and a big community center. Just, your typical status quo development that you would normally see in a low-income and a low-status community. And that was the city's winning proposal. And you want to hear something really hilarious? The day that we found out, I knew about it before, but the day that this project was released to the press, the winning bid, was my 50th birthday. So exactly 6 years ago today. But that's all right, because, we've taken this model, we're working on other projects, in other parts of the country that are very similar. So we're super excited about that. And, I'd like to close my talks with this quote, because this is Dr. King. This is from a letter from a Birmingham jail, which is I love that thing. If y'all haven't read it, you should. But this one, I hope, sirs, that you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Because you know what? We're tired of being sick and tired, to quote Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. The bottom line is, it's like, if we know, that the value of creating stronger, healthier communities actually goes to everybody, not just the people that are in those communities. But we can create the kind of value that does make ourselves feel like there's something good for all of us to be a part of. We can literally stop building these kind of like ridiculous places that make us feel like, all we have are the monuments to the things that make us feel terrible about ourselves, that make us point fingers at ourselves or at others that we may not you like to feel as though there's nothing good going on in our communities. But I do think that we can start building like truly the kind of spaces that help us see that a way forward toward hope and possibility, and really prove that we don't have to move out of our neighborhoods in order to live in better ones. And that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I literally wrote a book about it, and I hope you read and buy my book. So there you go. But thank you for that.
Majora, thank you so much. That was I love hearing your talk, and I'm really grateful that you were able to take the time to share this with us, especially on your birthday. And I know that you've got another event to jet off to. And I real quick, I'm just going to share my screen real quick, because you had mentioned that you and I had gone fishing on the Bronx River, and these are pictures from that little adventure. And I'm going to see if I can. I think what I really love most about everything that you've done is that you've literally transformed this community so that wildlife is coming back. Children have safe places to recreate, and it's a garden spot. It is absolutely beautiful, and it's right there on the Bronx River, in the heart of the city, and there you are with your glory fro casting a fly rod.
I love that picture.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorites too, because this definitely was transformational to me, because I recognize this building as a building that you framed much of your conversations around, and just being able to be a real community activist, I think, is critical. But I've got a couple of prepared questions for you, and I would love it if folks can populate the chat with questions of their own. But here's the big question for you, in that you constantly kind of skirt the line between self-gentrification and being able to expand the community as a whole. And at what point do we do ourselves a disservice by making a place better than it is now? Because sadly, what ultimately happens is that we wind up making it so that communities are unaffordable to the very people who live in them. Like, for example, the house that I grew up in Los Angeles, where my father still lives today, I could not afford to purchase, despite the fact that I grew up in a middle-class Black American family in the 1960s. That house is completely out of my price range right now. How do we fix that?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm not going to try to boil an ocean. That's just not my job. But what I can do is think about, making sure that, because the bottom line is, if your family still owns that home, then that's your generational wealth. So and we need to see more of that. And that's not something that we see very often. It's just, as horrible as I think the predatory speculators are, what I find even more challenging, is that, many of us sell outright because we don't understand the value of holding on to property, period. And so that is, so one of the things we have to do is stop selling our property, number one, and then create more opportunities for us to hold on to land. And so that is, like, I think the triage that has to happen, that almost nobody talks about, because, I literally, I'm watching the way private equity has continued, to go after our communities, because in a way, because they know that we don't know. And so I've been actually advocating for a number of things, one of which is that, the same way as like if you commit a crime, and can't afford, if you're accused of committing a crime and you can't afford, legal counsel, it will be provided for you. Our Constitution gives you that. But if but literally daily, people that own property in low status communities are approached by predatory speculators and with no understanding of how money moves, what this asset could mean for their lives. But so I think we should actually have a public real estate defender that supports people in low status communities so that they understand, because the thing is, like, we could change the dynamics within our communities if more people own. Like, we've watched since the 2008 crisis in my neighborhood alone, just a little part of my neighborhood, our home ownership rate, went from about more than 20% down to less than 7%. Almost all of that,
Wow.
almost all of it was through predatory speculation. In fact, when we bought this house, which is our second house here, the lawyer was just like, oh my God, this was like October. He was like, this is like the first mortgage for a property that has happened in the Bronx, because that's predatory speculators were buying these homes for cash. And that should be a national crisis, that we're literally looking at the places where people should be able to partake in the American dream, create stability within our own communities, and we're not. It's not even an issue for most people. And I'm sick of elected officials who act like, especially in low status neighborhoods, where it's like, oh, all we really need to do is worry about like getting more rental housing, when we know that rental housing lasts only as long as the subsidy does. And once the subsidy's gone, then it could immediately turn to market rate or anything else. And that's not helpful.
Wow. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, and I'm wondering if Tanya Stevens would like to ask her question. Just go ahead and unmute your microphone and have at it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi, how are you? I am so honored to be on the call with you. I was just posting in the chat, like, I saw you presenting a Brownsville conference in Detroit, probably, I mean, you know how long ago it was, probably like 2009, 10 or so.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I, at the time, was transitioning back, leaving Detroit, to your point, and then moving back home, to sort of, when I came back, I was kind of mortified at the condition of our city, because, you guys, everybody knows, we, experienced bankruptcy, and, fast forward, our land bank owns currently about 80,000 parcels of land.
Wow.
And and so it is, and it's, all the result of, a combination of course, the foreclosure epidemic, that we all experienced, but then also, the bankruptcy process, but then, a lot of legacy residents, obviously lost their homes during that process. We lost, 200,000 residents, since that time. And so I founded an organization dedicated to the sort of reclamation, preservation, beautification of, and acquisition of vacant land. And so I work with residents to help them acquire land from the land bank and private owners, but then also to sort of preserve and beautify, a lot of these vacant lots, because, with the land bank owning so much property, obviously they don't have the capacity to maintain it. So, our city, although, we've, as every other urban, core has experienced, rapid gentrification, the vacant lots don't get addressed in the same way. So anyway, I said all that to say, I was curious to know, if you have any sort of recommendations for additional funding sources outside of like private equity for sort of land transformation projects, similar to, what you did, there. Can you hear me? Did I lose her? Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Uh-oh.
Oops. Hey, Majora, you're muted.
Yeah.
So this is amazing. First of all, congratulations to you, Ms. Tanya, So are you, what, one thing I didn't quite understand from, I know you're land banking it and they were claiming it, but is the goal for them to move back into it or to build, and to make sure that it reverts to, local home ownership, or is it just the land bank?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what has happened is that most of the properties that were reverted to the land bank or given to the land bank, most of them by the bank, those homes have since been demolished. And so a lot of what I'm sort of speaking in reference to are vacant lots, not so much as residential structures, because most of them fell into disrepair, ended up being blighted for several years and then eventually demolished by the city, which is how the land bank now owns so many parcels.
Huh.
And they're not actively doing anything with them. What they will do and what they are doing now, well, that's not true. What they're doing, they've come out with a couple of different programs, but one of them specifically is specifically dedicated to real estate developers. And so what they'll do is they'll assemble lots, bundle them, and then, if the developer, has the right criteria, they'll sell them to developers. But then meanwhile, residents who may live in a community with, multiple vacant lots and may have been stewarding them, or, so we have tons of urban gardens, community gardens, urban farms. People have been stewarding the land, but they can't purchase the land from the land bank. And then the land bank has recently developed a couple of programs where they're selling lots to residents for very discounted rates, but then residents don't necessarily have the resources or means to upkeep them beyond, not even just upkeep, but, beautify them. They'll cut the grass, but then, there's very limited options in terms of, their resources, because, obviously that's not what they do. People are just trying to care for their communities, and we realize that the city's not going to intervene unless it is a developer that, doing the work. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, so I missed I'm still not totally clear, and I'd love to have a longer conversation with you about it. But I think from what I understand, so there's like either, I don't know if it's one or a few developers that really have eyes on those properties. My thing, honestly, is that the infrastructure needs to be put in place so that the people in those communities they start not just thinking of themselves as developers, but being developers of that property themselves. Because that in and of itself is, I think, one of the more tragic parts, of community development, that it's always somebody else coming from outside the community to do that. And development's not rocket science. And I know more than enough to be dangerous, mostly to myself. But the first thing that I do know is that there's other, they know how to use other people's money. Sometimes it's taxpayer money. And those are the type of things that we need to learn how to do for ourselves. And, if we can put ourselves in situations where, whether we are coordinating with or co-developing it with developers, in direct consultation and with the support of philanthropy and the government, so that it becomes more of this thing where it's just like people aren't literally continually looking at our neighborhoods as though we're just like, the poverty-stricken places where everybody else makes more money than we do. And I really think that when I hear land banks, because I frankly, I know of a bunch of them, it really is just sort of like, we're like playing with land. And I don't mean to be facetious or sound obnoxious, but it's like, our founding fathers and every part of the development of this country understood that land and has the value to create opportunity. And we're still often looking at, our communities as places that, we just need to build community, but not necessarily wealth generation for the people in our communities. We need to rethink how we think about our land and how we're using it to support the future economic goals of our communities. And I do believe more of us need to become developers, period. And I think I'd love to talk with you more about it, because that's amazing what you're doing.
I thank you.
Yeah. But I think I should probably, but so James, can you connect us, please?
I will. Tanya, if you would be so kind as to drop me a either direct message or an email, I will make sure that Majora gets back in touch with you. And Majora, I know that you've got another event to go to, so I'm going to let you go, but I cannot tell you how grateful and happy I am that you were able to spend your birthday and a very busy schedule with this community. Thank you so much.
So
I really want to thank everyone for being here today.
I can take another question.
Oh.
Totally. I mean, just,
Hey,
yeah, I've got one. I'm literally
do we have another question from the audience? Because truthfully, I mean, one of the things that I'm constantly amazed by is how you manage to, create these opportunities that other people can ultimately take advantage of, so that you can actually build wealth and create better understanding of how we can go about making community that is also sustainable. My friend James King has a question. James, go ahead and unmute your line and ask your question.
Hey, Majora, long time no see.
How
you doing? Man, through Power Shift and also through Dale. Yeah. So similar to yourself, I just been named here in Seattle the Chief Operating Officer of a community development and authority that is taking property and putting it into the benefit for the community in which was displaced. So this is a new concept in Seattle, new concept for the government. And my biggest thing on top of transparency for the community is something that you talked about, is finances. So how do we get people into a room to talk about something that they are afraid of? And that means developing finances, having those steps, protocols to check yourself and your finances, plus more. I mean, we have the classes, they're out there, but how do we get the people in the room to talk about those things?
Well, it's so funny because we actually, it was a total flop, a total failure, because even though we knew people needed, home ownership was something that we were constantly trying to prepare. And so we actually developed a relationship with Keller Williams, I'm sure they're out there, it's like a real estate company. But they're here, it turns out they're all very local, and the ones in the Bronx here, I mean, it's like all Black and brown people from the Bronx, and they're just like dedicated. They're just like, people need to know, now might not be the time, but you can repair your credit so that when you're ready to buy a house, do so. And so we were super excited, and they made a banner that said homeowner help and blah, blah, blah. And they set up office hours at our cafe, because people stop by there all the time. But what was clear, it was that homeowner people thought was outside of the realm of possibility for them. So they would literally come up to them and say in English and Spanish, oh, that's not for me, bye. And they literally couldn't get past go. And we realized that the next time we do it, we just need to call it credit repair, because people understand credit. Folks want a credit card, but they're like cool with that. But the thing is, the same way to get a credit card is the exact same things that you got to do to prepare yourself to get a house. So we realized that a lot of it's the messaging and meeting people where they are, so that they don't feel like stuff is out of reach for them. Like, we can have the dreams that are bigger than what they have, but to start, sometimes they're not there yet. And so we just have to hold space and give them reasons to kind of get there. And I think that's a big part of what we have to do. I really do.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, and Majora, just to remind you, James and you and I and Audrey and a bunch of other people were at the Grand Canyon about 10 years ago.
Yep.
For her first DEI event. So it's one big community coming full circle. I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone's time. And as much as I would love to continue this conversation for the rest of the evening, I want to make sure that I say thank you to everyone for being here tonight. And I really want to encourage all of you to continue to tune into these conversations, because I'm hoping to continue them for the foreseeable future. Our book topic for next month on November 30th will be Due North, a book by Lola. I'm going to completely obliterate her last name. She's a Black woman from Stockholm, Sweden, who has wonderful stories to tell about being a traveler. I want to thank again the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies for offering to host this forum. Also, the Schleck Family Foundation, as well as the National Geographic Society and the National Park Service for providing funding for this program. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Keep reading, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.